What does the future hold for the Oriental Islamic civilization? It's a difficult question to answer, and perhaps one which would take much thought and contemplation. Of course, guessing and anticipating what may happen in the future is a very difficult task. In other words, it's essentially, to use a metaphorical phrase here, betting against God and betting against fate itself. Very simply, you can't always anticipate what may happen in the near or distant future. Yet there are a few things that can be said with certainty. When it comes to Islamic civilization, it's quite important to know that the complete secularization project will, and already has to a certain extent, failed. Not only that, it's unfeasible that if such a civilization was to maintain its integral identity and to also move forward from an era where it has suffered much colonialism, that such a civilization would take part in the secular project. For better or for worse, whether one would agree with this or not, it would be necessary for such a civilization to retain its key characteristics, which are primarily the Islamic identity, the fusion of Arab, Turkic, and Persian cultures, and the very strong culture which has certain warrior elements and originally so had very strong scholarly elements as well in it. At the same time, I do not believe that a fundamentalist or puritanical movement would gain traction within the Muslim world, not at least at this point. The fundamentalist project has quite decisively failed in the mid 2010s, and a lot of the Muslim world has begun to move away from this more reformist, Salafist ideology, so to speak. This isn't to say that Salafism as a whole has been abandoned, but certainly its extremities or the extreme aspects of the movement have been discouraged in the mainstream Muslim narrative. Interestingly enough, a lot of Salafis are moving away from the more extreme aspects of the movement, not least from the Wahhabi or the theology of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and they are moving away from a lot of the other sort of extremities of that movement, so to speak. So what kind of movement would arise in the Muslim world? One that would be successful in its endeavour to establish a coherent, united Islamic identity and also allow for this kind of strengthening on a civilizational level. There are a few factors here. There's a very rich philosophical and metaphysical tradition within the Islamic sciences. Certain academics, and especially many in the West, may consider such theology and philosophy of the Muslims to be very much dogmatic in nature or based on false premises. Yet, whether one agrees with it or not, one cannot argue against the at least apparently rational nature of these arguments and this theology, and the great rational lengths to which Muslim theologians have gone to preserve the integral character of such arguments. The rational theological, philosophical, and metaphysical tradition, thus, of the Muslims, I believe, will play an important role in reviving this kind of Islamic identity. It will give confidence to a new kind of Muslim movement that has to tackle with the rationalistic Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment narratives of the West, and indeed of the various secular narratives of the world. It will give them a rational footing to stand on and defend their own tradition. Another important point here is that in terms of jurisprudence, although Muslims may seek to maintain a lot of the traditional values that they've held, they will inevitably have to adopt many modern sensibilities. It's very improbable that without adopting these modern sensibilities and without accepting a lot of modern ideas and notions, for example, accepting notions of human rights, for example, it's unfeasible then that any kind of Muslim movement could move forward. There are many pre-modern institutions that I think, without a doubt, will be left behind. And even if we were to return to more conservative or traditional views, it would, without a doubt, still be a watered-down or lighter version of those values. Some may point to extremist fundamentalist groups who carry out certain atrocities or have certain very extreme views, but again, these are the minority. The vast majority would, I suppose, form a more moderate view on certain issues. For example, certain pre-modern institutions, for example, very repressive social norms and lack of individuality, repression of certain minorities, or even, for example, slavery as an institution, at least in its very extreme, almost obvious and apparent form, will not be revived within the Muslim world. And it wouldn't necessarily be a return to a completely pre-modern institution. Indeed, the advantage that industrial modernity gives to militaries would make it infeasible for any country to return to this kind of pre-modern way of thinking or way of political organization. Hence, such a new Muslim movement which would be successful would inevitably adopt many modern sentiments, many modern sensibilities, many modern notions, and it would have to grapple with industrial modernity, the new technologies present, and as those technologies continue to develop with the introduction of AI and with the development of greater intelligences and intelligence that may surpass the intelligence of human beings even, those are very important questions and notions that will have to be solved by theologians in the future. Last but not least, spirituality will play a very important role. Of course, Tasawwuf and Sufism are very important aspects of the Islamic tradition, and the depersonalizing, very kind of repressive force of modernity, so to speak. These modern industrial conditions which lead to loneliness, nihilism, a solution for that can be found within mysticism and spirituality, and the Islamic narrative, of course, has plenty to offer in the form of Sufism. So, without a doubt, a modern movement which respected tradition, which respects the rational theology of the Muslims, which holds on to its tradition, which uses rational theology, which uses mysticism and Sufism, and sticks to the broader tradition but respects certain modern sensibilities and also adopts many modern notions, would without a doubt be the successful movement for Muslim civilization in the future. Such a movement would be moderate, not perhaps in Western terms, but at least by the terms of the Oriental civilizations and specifically Muslim civilization.